his full name is Gary Kubota. Takeo is, of course, a Japanese name. It means strong bamboo or strong warrior or something like that. And I was born on May 6, 1949, and raised in Kalihi in a place called Kalihi War Homes, which is veterans housing. Our former house is on the footprint of Kuhio Park Terrace, which is a public housing project now. So they needed to tear down Kalihi War Homes in order to build Kuhio Park Terrace, and we moved from there to Pearl City. Kalihi War Homes was veteran housing. You had like Filipinos, a lot of Japanese, but all the veterans who came back from the war, kind of working class guys, and a lot of them were in the apprentice programs at Pearl Harbor, like my dad, or else like trying to go to school. Like we had a lot of, got to know a lot of veterans. Actually, a lot of veterans and friends that we knew moved to Pearl City and just lived houses away from us. So that's really like a lot of the Japanese worked in the trades, like being like electricians, carpenters, plumbers, working at Pearl Harbor. And my dad worked as an electrician at Pearl Harbor.
Was your father at the Pearl Harbor in the 41 attack like that? Yeah.
No, he was actually on Kauai. He was in the what's called the Home Guard or Territorial Guard, and he was assigned to watch the beach after the attack. So he had a lot of Japanese Americans on the beaches with their rifle, and they were spaced about, he was saying, about 300 yards apart on the beach. And he said, well, what did they expect us to do if the guys came like that? Here we are, one rifle, and we're doing it.
Yeah.
And of course, like a lot of Japanese Americans, I guess they didn't get the memo that they were supposed to be interned and arrested up, because this was Hawaii, right? Yeah. So for a while, they were in the National Guard, guarding the beaches against a Japanese attack. And eventually, of course, they took away the rifles from the Japanese Americans. But it took a while before they got the memo, I guess. Yeah.
So how was it like growing up in that housing?
Oh, it was yeah, it was a rough area like that. You know, guys got into fights. You know, and you know, even when I was like 5, 6 years old, you know, we learned how to box.
Yeah. It was a given.
Yeah, you have to give in like that, and there are all kinds of, you know, crimes, petty crimes happening. Yeah. One time this guy, he got shot while trying to steal a car, and he was knocking on everybody's door trying to get into the house, right? But nobody, of course, would let him in. So he was bleeding all over the place before they caught him. And the folk guy was a guy, the folk person that kids used to talk about was a guy named Bad Boy Matias.
Bad Boy Matias.
Because he would run away from
that sounds like a really
prison.
Nice fictional name.
Yeah. He would run away from prison like that. But everybody knew that he would eventually get caught, because he would go up Kalihi Valley and he would head for his mother's house. So all the cops would wait for him before he come to the mom's house, and they'd be on the lookout, and they'd catch him every time. I think he must have escaped about 2-3 times or something, you know.
Interesting.
So, you know, there was that, but it was a safe neighborhood, I think, generally, because you had all these veterans from out from the war. Like my father, he was a staff sergeant in the 442nd, and you know, a lot of guys came out of the 442nd 100 Battalion, so they knew how to handle themselves, but they're very quiet about it most of the time. You know, these are the days when you had like clotheslines, and even the washing machine. They had these rollers, wooden rollers, where you would run your clothes through the wooden rollers to dry it, and then you would hang it on the clothesline. You know? So, and then it had ice boxes. They still call them ice boxes, and the Iceman used to come and drop in the ice box. And during that time, those 1949 to 1955, they began to have real refrigerators. So that kind of changed. Yeah. We lived on Linapuni Street. That's Kuhio Park Terrace Street, right? And we'd go down to Gulick Street, and we'd walk to Kalihi School. That's the elementary school. And eventually what happened is they built a bridge, an iron bridge like that when I was attending Kaliwa. So we didn't have to walk all the way around to King Street in order to get to the school. We could just cross it and go directly to the school. They moved to Pearl City, and it was one of the first suburbs in the Leeward Coast. And it was like, you know, tract homes. You had like basically 3 bedrooms and 1 bath, and you know, kitchen, living room, and you had maybe 3 different designs and 3 different colors. I think it was yellow, charcoal, and white or something like that. And so, you know, when people went there, they'd pick out the color and where they wanted to live, and then you know, it settled down in that area. But there were like mounds and mounds of red dirt at the time. There wasn't any environmental impact statement or anything. They would just like flatten out the ground, and then they would build the houses, you know. And there'd be all this red dirt all over the place because nobody planted grass back then.
So then you went to what school? You went to what high school?
Went to Kalihi Kai School, which was close to Pacheco Park. That was close to Kamehameha Highway. Then I went to, there was an elementary school by the time I graduated. It was Pearl City Elementary School, which is further up. And then I went to Pearl City Intermediate School. And then I went to Waipahu High School. We had to catch the bus to go to Waipahu High School because there wasn't any high school at the time in Pearl City. Yeah.
And what's the name of your parents?
Well, my dad's name was Takao T-A-K-A-O Kubota, and my mom's name was Yoshie, and she was Yoshie Noi, like that. And you know, they both were from Kauai, and I think they lived in Waimea and Kapa'a area, and of course they had big families. A lot of both sides of the family, the brothers and uncles served in World War II in the 442nd or in MIS, and one of them actually died. Uncle Tommy died while flying with the interpreters over Okinawa. My understanding is a Japanese Zero shot him down or something like that, and so that was 3 days before the end of the war.
Wow.
Yeah, that's when it happened. Yeah. I guess it must have tested out well for the college exams, because it certainly wasn't like, you know, I was getting like maybe C plus average in high school, and you know, I didn't attend high school that much. You know, senior year I think I was absent 20 times in the first 3 months, and the vice principal told me if I was absent one more time they were going to hold me back, and I told him, well, you know, I'm getting the grades, what's the matter, you know? And he said, well, no, that, you know, that didn't count, so whatever. So I, you know, started going to classes, and you know, I read a lot. I read books outside of class. I read my sister's books. They were attending the University of Hawaii. I'd go through the literary books and things like that. You know, I was pretty much a pretty good reader and fast reader. And I didn't realize it, but I also had the ability to synthesize information once I read it. And that turned out to be, I guess, a gift. My grandfather on my father's side and my grandmother were Japanese school teachers. And he used to write for a newspaper. I found out much later in life. When they lived in Lahaina, he would send dispatches to a Japanese newspaper in Honolulu. So I guess we came from that kind of background, and you know,
So that's in your family.
Yeah, my grandmother. One day when I was visiting my grandmother, and I was only like about 5-6 years old, she proclaimed that I was going to be a writer. And my mother thought she was crazy, you know, because of course I was all over the place, you know, as a kid. I mean, I'd do all kinds of stuff, and I didn't hear about that till much later in life. But that was the basic understanding and the atmosphere in which I grew up in Pearl City. I was pretty happy, you know. Pearl City had a lot of sugarcane fields, a lot of mountains we could go up to, climb plum trees, you know, and go and swim in the sugarcane reservoirs until the cane man would come and tell us to get the hell out. Things like that. So, you know, we had a pretty good life. And then, you know, we'd go, when I got older, I went to judo, karate, and then we went surfing down by Eva Beach. And then sometimes we'd catch a friend of mine. He had his mother worked at the Hilton, so we'd jump aboard and we'd spend the whole summer day going from Kaiser all the way to Kuhio Beach, and with our sand surfboards and body surfboards, and going
Good life.
good life like that. And then the Beach Boys would chase us away from where we were, and we'd go to the next hotel, and then the Beach Boys would chase us away from that area, and we'd go to the next one, and we end up in Kuhio Beach, and then we'd have a plate lunch or something like that. Yeah. So it's kind of good fun, you know.
Yeah.
And so I got to know all the different kinds of surfers and different kinds of things that were happening down Kuhio Beach. And it was really an amazing time for transformation. I mean, when I went to the university, I was surprised because I was thinking, well, I'll get drafted or I'll go into the military service like my dad did, you know, I'll do my time. And like, you know, my father, like that generation, I mean, they would just say, you know, right or wrong, your country, you know, so, you know, you required to serve your time for, you know, defending your country or whatever. And I grew up with that, and I believed in that. And at the same time, I did attend church for a while, like, you know, several years, Baptist church, because I went through a rough period of time when my father was actually institutionalized. He, at the time, people didn't know it, but he had PTSD. He had a bit of schizophrenia from the war. This was when I was in intermediate school, and the church, First Baptist Church of Pearl City, in many ways helped me to keep my temper down, because I used to get into a lot of fights, and I noticed that a friend of mine didn't. And so when talking to him, he was attending the church. A couple of my friends attended the churches, and so I started going, because then I would think, you know, when I get into the situation, I just like say, okay, sorry, and then I'd walk away for the most part, and you know, instead of getting into these fights, because I had a lot of anger in me about the kind of it, you know, I guess I didn't regard it as abandonment, but I thought it was kind of like that in terms of society forgetting about this so-called war hero who was my dad, like that, who rescued the Texans when they were surrounded by Germans like that, you know. He got a Silver Star when he was doing that, but you come home and everything, and the parade's gone, and I never was part of that parade. All we were stuck doing was trying to keep our economic heads above the water and keep the family close and trying to help my father. So that kept on through most of my high school too. When I went to the University of Hawaii, I met this teaching assistant who needed help. He was handicapped, and part of the agreement was he'd knock off the rent if I helped him, you know, with the task that he needed. And I lived in Waikiki, and so I attended the university, and of course, like, you know, I learned some study habits from him and his associates who were going to the University of Hawaii and getting their master's degrees in various subjects. And it was the first time that where we had really kind of interesting conversations, more like Socratic kind of conversations. It wasn't just a matter of lecturing, it was a matter of asking questions and then providing answers or asking more questions. And I kind of thrived in that environment because I was never afraid to speak up, and that was probably one of my strong faults when I was going to high school, because I would ask questions of people and make the teachers feel uncomfortable sometimes. And of course the same happened sometimes when I opened my mouth to some local guys, and which led to repercussions. But it was all kind of, you know, for me it was all kind of fun like that. So actually I did better in college than I did in high school. You know, which was really a surprise to a lot of people, including myself. But I had more passion to study. And one of the things I studied, you know, I read a lot about. I took political science. I heard Stokely Carmichael talk about various subjects. I read Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleaver, Martin Luther King's writings, Nietzsche, Sartre, Camus, Frantz Fanon, Wretched of the Earth. I began to understand the concept of institutionalized racism. And I would be, because I felt alienated myself. You know, here I was in the University of Hawaii in Hawaii, and we were studying world history, how history was started in the Tigris Euphrates, right? And then spread throughout Europe. And I knew that we didn't come from the Tigris Euphrates or Europe. We came from Asia. But there was hardly any mention of that or our contribution. And I thought, well, you know, maybe later on we'll get to it. Well, we never did, frankly. Not in the history classes I attended. And then I would sit down in the quad. There would be a walkway where concourse, and I'd sit down and I'd watch the people passing, and maybe 50% of them were Caucasian, maybe like 25%, 30% Japanese or Asian, and the rest were kind of like mixed, you know. But there are very few Hawaiians. Among like 300 people who passed by, I would be lucky if I saw three Hawaiians or Filipinos. So the reason for that was basically a lot of them were going into the military or being channeled into other kind of professions, but they weren't in college. And I began to understand the structure of institutionalized racism. It's not that people were purposely saying, you gotta, you know, like, you know, you're stupid and you can't go. But it's the way that the society and institutions were structured that caused this kind of racism to exist and pushed a lot of the minorities to go into Vietnam because they didn't get the student exemptions that few of us who were fortunate did. And it made me a bit angry to think about that because that wasn't being addressed. The only place I heard it being addressed was by guys like Stokely Carmichael, the Black Panthers, and by Ewart Kuhn out of San Francisco. They were talking about it. And then there were people who were trying to form ethnic studies at the University of Hawaii. And they were beginning to talk about it and forming their own lesson plans and things like that. So I began, that was the beginning of my genesis. And then, of course, at a certain point, I had to make a decision because I dropped out of school, not because of grades, but because I felt like I needed to take a breather. And all that time, I was always working on the side, like, you know, working as a busboy or a waiter or a dishwasher at the resorts or hotels and going to school. And so I began to feel like I needed a breather in order to read more, study more, and think about things. And that's what I did. But in the meantime, I also understood that I would get drafted eventually, perhaps. And so I looked at options and decided at a certain point, when I studied what was happening in Vietnam, that I wouldn't go. And it was a point, I think, when I realized what my core beliefs were and the fact that, you know, if you're going to go to war, you better be willing to die, period, you know, because that's the way it is. And if you survive, that doesn't mean you're going to really survive, because my father didn't really survive fully like that. He never did. So you have to be very serious about and conscious about what you do. You have one life. And so you better study, you know, what you really want to do. And politically and philosophically, I decided that it wasn't for me. Politically, it seemed apparent to me that the United States had broken the United Nations Accord in the early 1950s when it decided to occupy Vietnam after an understanding had been made that the French would withdraw and the Vietnamese would take over. The Vietnamese, by the way, of course, were the ones who fought against the Japanese during World War II. They assumed that they would get their country back, but instead all these European countries gave France, let France reoccupy their colony in Vietnam, Indochina, and that upset the Vietnamese, and that's why they fought again for independence. It just so happened that the only people who wanted to support them were the Chinese, so they sided with the Chinese. But it was always a nationalist movement, as I understand it, and the test is that basically now Vietnam and China are fighting against each other for offshore oil. So again, like, you know, this whole theory of domino effect really didn't work. You know, and in the long run, there was no domino effect. There was a fight for natural resources. And you know, I decided that I would look at my options, and especially because my philosophy was more based on my interpretation of Christianity and Martin Luther King and nonviolence. That I would become a conscientious objector, maybe, if it fit. And I decided I'd look into it. But you see, I hadn't gone to church in a long time, so it wasn't going to be like I was a religious zealot or anything like that. It was just based on spiritual grounds and my own personal political philosophy. And so I had to really think about that and formulate something. And I applied for conscientious objection based on my own spirituality and belief in nonviolence and peace. And the draft counselor told me, you know, that the chances of getting it were pretty slim because he'd not heard of anybody getting it before. And if people got it, it was on religious grounds. And I said, well, I can't do the religious ground stuff. So I did it on those grounds, and I expected to go to jail because that, you know, that's what happened. I knew there was a guy named Dana Park who had already gone to jail, was serving time in Leavenworth. And so I was pretty much set that if that was going to happen, that was going to happen. As a matter of fact, when the draft board asked me what I would do if I didn't get it, I told them basically throw me in jail. I'm not going, you know. And that was it. And around that time when all this was happening, of course, Kalama Valley arose. And I did get a deferment, but I wasn't sure how it would pan out like that. If they decided to put me in some kind of military-industrial complex or anything that had anything remotely to do with violence or assisting violence, I'd go to jail. And I figured if I was going to go to jail for that, you know, for some Vietnamese that I didn't know, I may as well go to jail in Kalama Valley with the Hawaiians who I grew up with, and some Hawaiians who helped me out, like and do that as well. And I had met Larry Kamakawiwo'ole, who was with Kokua Hawaii, because I had begun to work as a draft counselor at the American Friends Service Committee, and also with Wally Fukunaga at the United Church of Christ at Off Center. And I listened in on the conversations that Kokua Kalama and Kokua Hawaii were having, and I like what they were talking about. I think that Larry, of course, had a master's degree. He had a good understanding of institutionalized racism and what was happening on a broad issue. And I also felt that he had a grounding in terms of the whole concept of nonviolence. Not that, you know, he was necessarily, or anybody there was necessarily a total pacifist. I think we all kind of strive for it, but sometimes, you know, when you get angry like that, suddenly you get into a fight, and then you remember you're supposed to be a pacifist, you know, something.
Well, sometimes some actions are righteous.
Well, I don't know about righteous, but I remember the situation got like that, and my friend looked at me and he said, "I thought you said you're a nonviolent pacifist." And I looked at him and said, "Well, I didn't say I was perfect, you know." Because I took martial arts, you know, for many years, and my church did, so I wasn't perfect. Before I went into Kalama Valley, that very day, there was this Methodist minister, and
that very day that you went in.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
you remember the date or?
Oh, it was like May 3.
May 3 of 2000.
Of 1971. The very day, and I was going in with a friend, and he had heard about it because I talked to him. You know, we were just talking in front of the Off Center Coffee House, and he said, "I thought you said you were, you know, you're a pacifist and nonviolent." And I said, "Well, pacifism and nonviolence doesn't mean that you avoid violence, right? I'm going to go there, and if I can help, I will, you know." And he looked at me like I was making an excuse out of it, you know. But that really wasn't the case like that. I didn't intend to go there and shoot it out with the police or anything like that. I went there because I wanted to show support, moral support. And if it was dangerous or violent like that, well, maybe I could help, you know, because I wasn't going to do that. And that was the intention when I went to the valley. And that was my intention pretty much throughout this whole thing. Like I said, I'm not perfect, you know. One of my roommates was a guy named Nick Goodness. I eventually was living in this apartment with like about, must have been 4 other guys. And Nick Goodness was one of those guys. He's from Maui. And he started this group called Concerned Locals for Peace. And Nick, you know, is like a part Hawaiian guy, and we got along well. And I listened to what he had to say because actually it was closer to how I believed. In other words, they're concerned locals for peace, but they weren't against the military. Because a lot of the uncles and stuff like that were in the military. They weren't into burning the flag, you know, because, again, you know, their fathers had defended the United States in various wars and things like that. And so I could kind of relate to that a little bit more, better than what happened in Bakumenho with the struggle involving Oliver Lee, which was a struggle for the Professor Oliver Lee's tenure, and the people there with the SDS and the SDS, and they're more like from the mainland, like, you know, Hollies from the mainland, who were, you know, kind of well-intentioned but kind of off the wall at the same time. A lot of them actually, to me, were like rich Hollies who, or kind of like, it appeared that way, who like could say anything they wanted because they didn't live there, you know, and they're, you know, they didn't have relatives over there. But no, I knew that, you know, whatever I said would be a reflection upon people would wonder about my family like that. So, and, you know, people I grew up with would make judgments. So, whatever I did and said had an immediate effect upon my family. And frankly, it wasn't easy for my parents enough in terms of like me deciding not to join the military or not to resist, basically. You know, my father and my uncles like that, I never talked to them. Some of them I never talked to them ever again, like that. That's how big a break there was. You know, one of my uncles even decided he was going to come into the house and beat me up. Then I think he remembered that he took martial arts and he stopped. But and my father was the same way. He was angry. He was very angry, and he didn't even talk to his friends about me because, you know, it was an embarrassment, frankly, at that point. And that, I think that happened throughout his life. He could never talk about me after that. So here I am in Kalama Valley, you know, and about, I think the 5th or 6th day, somebody asked me to go up on the roof and look out to see if the police are coming, shout down, you know, that the police are coming.
You know who asked you to go up there? You don't remember?
I don't remember. Might have been just one of those guys in the steering committee, like that. So I go up there, and I'm looking, and then I see some people taking pictures of me, and I'm going, oh man, you know. So yeah, so little did I know, of course, because we're not getting the papers all the time over there. Little did I know that, you know, the next day, my mom's in the bathroom, you know, she's reading the newspaper and she sees a photograph of me sitting on the roof. Bloody murder. She screams. There's a blood curdling scream, and she comes out like that with all my sisters there. And anyway, so they weren't aware that I was there, like that. So it was, you know, it was a tough time because nobody in my family or relatives supported that kind of action, but I did, and you know, I was on my own. I made my own living, And I'd gone through high school pretty much feeling like I had to do it alone. I mean, you know, there's support from the family, my mom and stuff like that, but we didn't get any support from relatives or anything like that, hardly anything. So it gave me that kind of sense of independence of mind and strength of mind to do what I felt was right, you know. And what was right is helping out these poor people who were getting evicted, and after getting evicted, some of them 3-4 times before, and now having no other place to go. And then their relatives getting drafted and going to war, and some of them dying, you know. I mean, what's up with that? And that's the kind of issue that I could relate to at that point. They wanted us, the first thing they wanted was to help George clean the pig pens. So we did that.
It was fun, huh?
Yeah. Well, no, not really, but you know, we did whatever we needed to do. That was my theory. If you're gonna help people, you don't get to select, especially guys like me, you know. So, I mean, I was a grunt basically, and so I went inside there. You know, you shoot down the pens, clean up whatever we could, and then you know, do whatever we could to help out.
Did George give you an affectionate name?
Oh no.
Oh no.
No.
Okay.
You know, it was kind of interesting because you see, I've always been good at listening to what people want me to do and doing it, because I'm basically a working class guy. Okay, with Pete Thompson, you know, he was like this brilliant guy who was able to pull information together, synthesize it, and explain what the situation was on a political, economic, and personal level. Even when I was not in Kokua, Hawaii, and I was at the University of Hawaii, and I was doing an independent documentary called H3, A Question of Direction, we were looking for someone who could serve as the speaker addressing why the H3 freeway was not going to do what was going to harm the farmers and the environment. And Pete Thompson was one of the people I turned to get that explanation, because Pete had that kind of a grounding in it. And so he basically spoke about how, you know, although they're saying that the freeway is going to make things easier for people to travel, he spoke about the impact of the freeway in terms of urbanizing the surrounding areas, converting farmland into suburban homes, creating another urban center rather than a bedroom community, which Kaneohe and Kailua was supposed to be, and other areas of the North Shore. And this was something that the other advocates, who were like the government officials, governor, Department of Transportation, they were not addressing in the documentary itself. They were totally in favor of it. So he served a very important purpose in terms of the leftist movement to voice the feelings of the farmers and the poor people. Basically, I went in there to get arrested, and then
Explain that.
Yeah, I basically went into Kalama Valley to get arrested. You know, I figured if I'm gonna get arrested potentially for opposing the Vietnam War, I may as well get arrested in Hawaii on a Hawaiian issue with Hawaiians who, you know, as a culture I loved, and Hawaiians who I, you know, respected and things like that. Kalama Valley was like breaking the mold, you know. The stereotypes of quiet, obedient Japanese, lazy Hawaiians, non-intellectuals, all these kind of things.
Local people in general. Right?
Local people in general. All these things we were breaking the mold on. Larry Kamakawiwo'ole, the way he spoke with such eloquence about the issue, broke the mold.
Already was kind of legendary, huh, the way he talked.
The way he talked.
I'm going to give my Martin Luther King.
Okay.
The way he talked, the way Larry talked. I know Larry was not necessarily always in his mind a pacifist, but the way he talked made you think of Martin Luther King. You know, he had this kind of like way of calling people together and inviting them to have these kinds of emotions and feelings for people. And it was okay to be against what the prevailing opinions were. And it was important to be able to respect the feelings of Hawaiians and the farmers who had been pushed around. And all these kind of things, people were going, yeah, you know. And so that, all of a sudden it was like what they call in Hawaiian a kahea, where you know, they talked on the radio about calling for help, and all these people who had listened were coming to Kalama Valley. Local people were coming to Kalama Valley because they heard a local guy talking about it.
So in Kalama Valley, there were, of course, many meetings where people, things were being decided upon. You know, for example, you know, the exclusion of haoles and leadership or whatever, and also about the guns and all these kind of things like that. Were you part of the discussion? Were you there?
You know, I was there, but not there. Like I was like the Indian. You know, I mean, I was like the guy, not the Indian, but you know, I was like the guy who like did whatever they wanted me to
grunt,
do.
you were saying.
The grunt, you know. So like I remember, and it looking real dangerous in the beginning, because of course when I went to get into the valley, the police were blocking the road into the valley. Then somebody said, "Oh, if you go down half a mile, there was a break in the bushes, and if you go through the bushes, they're gonna pick you up." So my friend and I went down there, and then we went through the bushes.
Who's your friend?
Was a Holly guy. His name was Ralph, and he lived at the hostel that was across from Off Center. And he had a loaf of white bread that he was bringing. I wasn't bringing anything. It was kind of like, you know, I was going to go there and check it out, and see what I could do. It wasn't too well contemplated, but you know, I decided to go. And so when we got over, all of a sudden a Volkswagen picked us up, and then we were going, and there was a guy named Red. Later on I found out he was Moose Louie, one of the residents' nephews, and he was driving, and then the police helicopter was following us. You know, I thought, oh, this is interesting, you know, but Red didn't want to arrive at George's house, showing them where we were going and all that, for various reasons. So he parked in the middle of these big, huge dirt mounds and waited until the helicopter ran out of gas and went away. And then we went to George's house. But that kind of set the tone of the situation. This was not a quiet situation. This was a situation where things were potentially going to get, in my mind, it might arrive at a point where, like, you know, people were going to decide whether they wanted to stay or not, whether they wanted to shoot it out or not, whether they wanted to passively resist or not. I went there because I felt that, you know, there were some cooler heads, like maybe Larry or something like that would prevail.
So you knew Larry beforehand, right?
Yeah. I tell you, I knew him on the periphery. I knew that he had a degree in religious studies.
He was a lecturer at the time.
He was a lecturer at the time, and he was a good friend of Wally Fukunaga. And Wally was pretty much, you know, a close friend of Larry's. And Wally had a lot of meetings of Kokua Hawaii at Off Center, and would occasionally enter into discussions and things like that. I was on the periphery. I basically did draft counseling for Wally, and basically my role was, sometimes I get invited to high school, and I'd be walking in as the Marine recruiter was coming out, and then I'd go in, you know, with my long hair and denim shirt and jeans, and I slap a map on the bulletin board that had a picture of Vietnam where the oil wells were offshore, you know, in Southeast Asia, and I'd say, let me tell you why we're in Vietnam. And that was the beginning of it. And then, you know, I'd give them a different kind of a history that people weren't aware of. My thought on this was not to convert anybody to resist or to become a conscientious objector when they didn't want to become one. But my feeling was that these guys from Waipahu, from Roosevelt, from all these other high schools, they deserve to know all the facts before they made their decision, and that they weren't being given all the facts.
Who's the best cook there?
Okay, well, one guy was actually, his name was Ed Ching,
Oh,
and I found out later on he actually was a cook. He was a cook in the service like that, you know. He was like a cook for one of the generals or something like that. So Ed was always there. He, you know, he seemed pretty handy. He knew how to throw things together. But what I was impressed with was the fact that they were organized. And it was men and women working together to put it together. And it was local guys, and you know, it wasn't any kind of theatrics or anything like that. They were just a lot of times very real about how they did things and got things accomplished. And I liked that about them. I felt very comfortable. You know.
I heard Soli was a legendary cook too. His secret ingredient was oyster sauce.
Soli was, okay, I'll tell you. Soli, I wasn't quite sure what was happening. I think, because like, you know, the only thing I remember is one time he came in with his I called it a cop car. It was like a Buick LeSabre. And, you know, I thought, wow, what is he doing with a Buick LeSabre? Because, you know, the only person I saw with a Buick LeSabre was the guy at Hosen Bakery who was the owner. And I had to clean his car. You know, that was part of my job like that. So I knew what a Buick LeSabre looked like. And the joke went around. Actually, quite a few people later on told me they thought Soli was a cop, you know, undercover cop. But I was thinking, if he's an undercover cop, he's really not a very good undercover cop driving around a Buick LeSabre, you know. But he just turned out to be a real open kind of a guy, a real friendly kind of guy, and actually a very educated kind of guy. Because what happened was that as I got to know him more, we would sit in on things like he and Joy would sit in, and Joy, of course, was, you know, a congressional aide to Patsy Mink before, and I didn't know that. She was a teacher at Waianae when she got arrested. So Soli and Joy, and Soli was like a recreational director at Kalihi Palama, something like that, you know. So they had administrative posts, so they had a lot to lose by being involved. And you know, I admired that about them, you know, putting themselves on the line. But they were the ones that when we had to organize fundraisers or we needed to get money for something, they're the ones who figured out a way of doing it. And they're the ones who took care of the books and could actually make the organization work. Again, in the beginning, I was like, you know, the grunt like that. I'd go to meetings and I'd listen in. I'd try to help cooking or doing whatever was needed. I began helping them with the Huli newspaper, doing some editing, writing some stories. But my focus was primarily about the Vietnam War, so I would write sections about the Vietnam War and what was happening there, and the reasons, you know, why, you know, a lot of people were opposed to it. So there was my role in that sense of taking it to a more an international level, because the organization already was pretty much ground into this whole anti-eviction movement. Hawaiians and locals and minorities, definitely institutionalized racism was pretty apparent. And there were some veterans who were with the organization, but they had a real difficulty articulating their opposition to it without really getting angry. There were a lot of angry veterans in our organization, you know, and understandably so. I mean, Edison Ching, Butch Goodness. I mean, Butch was severely wounded, but you know, you saw his wounds like that. He had, and you could put your finger through one of his wounds that he had in his back, and so the veterans supported us, and it just made a whole lot of sense. And we, you know, just their mere presence, like to me gave us credibility in different ways. You know, the veterans being there, Joy An, Soli, Mary Choi, who was a wife of a physician,
Duke Choi.
Duke Choi. I didn't know this in the beginning, but when I realized that the things that she was like before, like a socialite and everything, and she was now with us, I was going, she looks like my mom, you know?
Her husband was my baby doctor,
Yeah.
and then we went to the same church together.
Yeah, and so I thought to myself, boy, I wonder what kind of circumstances made her decide to. So it just gave me a feeling like there was an understanding, like, you know, there's credibility, you know, to what we were doing, and that helped a lot in terms of, you know, the emotional makeup of the group. I think that it was unsaid almost. Just her mere presence was enough to be able to make people feel grounded. Day of the arrest like that, when the time came, there was talk about where we should go and everything, and the idea was basically, the strategy was, they told me to climb up on the roof and then bring the ladder up, because at the very least, in terms of resistance like that, we figured that it would give the news media more time to get to Kalama Valley, because and it did. Basically, because the police, of course, they don't carry ladders with them. So there was no ladder. There was another ladder, but we hid that one. And so the one ladder that was on top of the roof was our ladder, and we weren't giving it up. You know, initially anyway. They had the fire department had to get their own ladder, and of course they didn't have the fire department there in the beginning too. So they had to call the fire department, and the fire department had to come with the ladder. By the time the news media had all arrived, and I know that I don't know, you know, I know along the ridges of the mountains I saw glints, metal glints like that, and I said, hey, you know, I think there might be snipers up there, like that. And I think Ray said, whatever you guys do, don't make no quick moves. I was thinking, yeah, Catania, and so I thought, oh, great. So we were up there on the roof and we waited and everything, and I think that some people are trying to decide whether they want to get arrested or not. And I remember like people who were close to the house and stuff. There was farmers who wanted to, Achingpo, Manny Botello, they're like farmers and pig farmers, and they got arrested. And then, of course, the Black Richards guys, they got arrested too, Black and Ann Richards. So there were residents there who had then made a decision to get arrested with the group like that. And this is the first time, you know, I mean, like, for everybody, for most people, I think it's the first time they ever got arrested. You know, and so it was very serious for them, what they were doing. And very emotional time. And then I also had met Randy Kalahiki and Sammy Lono on earlier days before this happened, and they came. And the funny part was that, okay, when we were going down the ladder, right, we decided, well, we're not going to have a police carrying us down because the bug are going to drop us probably. So then we're going down the ladder and all that, and then like I'm walking by as I'm getting booked, right, and here's Sammy Lono and Randy like that, and they're over there and they're talking to the police, and Sammy's going, you know, he's a kahuna lapa'au, right, but he's a kahuna like that. And Sammy was chanting and all that. Then after that he was going, arrest me, like this. He's going, arrest me, and the police are looking at him and they were turning away and walking away. They didn't want to arrest a kahuna, and you know, because virtually all of them were like Hawaiians like that, you know. So it was kind of interesting. I was going over there and thinking to myself, okay, well, I guess they'll arrest me, but they won't arrest Sammy. But you know, it's kind of funny because actually I think what happened in the course of that was Sammy and the presence of Sammy and people like the presence of Randy Kalahiki gave it a steadying effect, because they're members of the community and So any thoughts of violence at that point, I think pretty much were dismissed, because they realized that these people, including ourselves like that, were grounded in the community. And yeah, we're serious about what we were doing.
Can you summarize what you feel is the important significance of the Kalama Valley struggle?
The Kalama Valley struggle was, first of all, the first time in modern history when people got together to resist land policies imposed upon that caused the eviction of people, that caused alienation of farmers and Hawaiians, and it raised a lot of questions. You know, not all the issues are clearly articulated, but I knew, and a lot of people knew at that time, whatever was happening was wrong. Whatever was happening was just dead wrong. And out of that, there came a lot of thinking and questioning about Hawaiian homelands, ceded lands, the presence of the military, the policies of Bishop Estate, the questioning of the kind of thing about what do you do when a big developer wants to develop the land. Did anybody ask, is there anybody living there? What are you guys going to do when they get evicted? These kind of questions were not asked at that time. They felt like, oh, well, you know, that's their problem. Because, you know, they paid their rent and now they got to move. Well, I think that nowadays, at least, a lot more so than before, people realize that you have to ask these questions. Especially now when we're facing a homeless crisis in Hawaii. Where do you think the homeless people came from? A lot of them are second, third generation homeless. They were evicted from these other places. They doubled up in Waianae, they doubled up in other places. They doubled up, tripled up as much as they could. And now, 2-3 generations later, you're facing what you sowed into the soil. And that was a lack of care and a lack of foresight in terms of finding affordable housing for your own people. And that's the thing that Kalama Valley did.